Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Moore, Mr. Teefank, Madam Secretary, Mr. Inspector General, Mark Smith, Mr. City Attorney, Carlos de la Guerra, and members of the public. Today is January 24th, 2023. It's 9:30 a.m. This is a special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning, Commissioner Briggs,
Present.
Commissioner Decker,
Present.
Commissioner Bonner,
Here.
Commissioner Kalanche,
Here.
and Commissioner Sobroff.
Here.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Also present, we have the Executive Director, the Chief of Police, the Inspector General, and the City Attorney. Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We welcome everyone attending this morning. All public comment will be heard during item 2 on the agenda. We will dedicate a total of 45 minutes to public comment. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public who participate in public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of the Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address the board. So you are free to express your opinion on matters before the board and to generally express when you disagree with other opinions expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinions shall be deemed off topic and your public comment period will be concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in the public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in one of a number of ways that are outlined on the agenda. At this time, we're going to go to item number 1 on the agenda, the report of the Chief of Police. Good morning, Chief Moore.
Commissioner President Briggs, good morning. Vice President Decker, Commissioner Kalanche, Commissioner Bonner, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. Inspector General, Mr. Teefank, Commissioner Sobroff. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm going to update numbers on COVID as far as new and reinfection numbers that cover a 2-week period of time since our meeting last week did not have this update. I'm also going to separate the numbers for the week of the 14th of January, and then follow it by the week of the 21st. Overall, our COVID numbers as far as infections and new infections continue to slow, which is good information. And a positive citing. Regarding the 14th, we had 39 new cases from the previous week of new COVID cases or reinfections. Of that, 32 were fully vaccinated. That's 82%. This following week, closing on the 21st of January, we had 31 additional new cases, of which 30 were individuals that had been previously vaccinated. That's a 97%. We continue to see the number, again, of reinfections as well as new infections slow. We currently have 73 of our personnel that are home recovering. The last time I reported that number was 148, so a significant reduction. And those I'm happy to report have all returned back to work. We continue to have 14 long COVID cases with no hospitalizations, again, a positive attribute. And our current absent from the workplace for COVID cases continues to be approximately 9 work days. In regards to significant events, let me first frame my remarks in the offering of condolences to the families and the communities of Monterey Park, as well as Alhambra, and tragically last night, Half Moon Bay. America, particularly our local region, the state and our local family has seen a terrible impact of mass shootings and the loss of life and the devastating impact it has on a community's sense of safety. Saturday night into Sunday morning, when the department learned of this mass shooting in Monterey Park and the efforts of a similar attack in Alhambra nearby, Deputy Chief David Kowalski responded on behalf of the department and met and coordinated our involvement with the Sheriff's Department and the Monterey and Alhambra Police Departments for the hours that followed. Additionally, we offered resources from the city, and the mayor's crisis response team responded to help as they had established a family unification center and efforts to provide grief counseling for those that are impacted by this terrible tragedy. Additionally, our own behavioral sciences police psychologists are also standing by to support the first responders that witnessed such terrible carnage. Additionally, during Sunday morning and into today, we have continued to outreach out to our AAPI communities across the Los Angeles region and assuring them that our presence would be there for any posted or Learner Day New Year's celebrations. We on Sunday had a number of those in various parts of the city, and we detailed uniformed personnel at each one to meet with and liaison with the organizers, and again, a sense of providing an added sense of safety. At the time, we were unaware, and the investigation was still unfolding as to the nature of this attack and whether or not these venues posed as additional targets. So that was the purpose of those liaisons. And of course, we followed through the course of the day and learned quickly the identity of the gunman, and it was that being resolved with, unfortunately, him taking his life, but fortunately no longer a threat to our communities. We will continue our close liaison with the AAPI community in the aftermath of this tragic and horrific attack to work with them, a community that has been traumatized repeatedly over these last few years in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, where the pandemic itself was weaponized and the AAPI communities became targets of hate, both in instances as well as attacks. On a lighter note and a more positive note, I enjoyed a series of attending various events in honor of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On his birthday. And that included the YMCA Metropolitan Board, as well as their annual Brotherhood Breakfast. I want to thank also the Los Angeles Police Foundation, our community relations section, our community engagement, and a number of command officers that attended the department's own Martin Luther King Jr. appreciation celebration that occurred on Saturday. Commissioner Bonner, thank you for your attendance and your remarks to the gathering of faith and community leaders. And the next day, thank you also, or 2 days later, for attending with me on what was suspected to be a rainy Monday, but turned out to be quite a beautiful day of sunshine and enjoyment as we participated as an entrant in the Martin Luther King parade. And with that, over 100 of our personnel walking in the parade, members of all parts of our Los Angeles LAPD family, to participate in a wonderful parade that had a number of positive spirits, a number of community members that showed their appreciation for the hard work our men and women do. I also want to talk briefly that we, over in the aftermath of these 3 critical instances that we discussed at my last meeting with you in regards to 2 officer-involved shootings and in custody death, well, we assembled a pastoral group of ministers and faith leaders and discussed those recent events, walked through the videos of the critical instances, heard their concerns, and also spoke about our actions in regards to the ongoing investigation, as well as our work with our patrol officers and all of our personnel in reiterating our expectations when dealing with persons experiencing mental illness, the resources that are available, and the importance and efforts of de-escalation and finding ways in which to overcome trying and difficult circumstances. Sadly, on this past Saturday, I attended the services of Riverside Deputy Darnell Calhoun, as well with a contingent of LAPD officers, in mourning his loss and the sacrifice he made in the service of his community. Moving to the categorical use of force, during this last 2-week period, we did have a officer-involved shooting that did not involve a hit. It is an ongoing investigation. But this past brief description of it, on the 21st of January at approximately 3:08 in the morning, Uniform Mission Patrol Division officers were conducting a stolen vehicle investigation in the area of Canterbury Avenue and Hoyt Street. There, the officers observed 3 individuals associated with the vehicle walking eastbound on Hoyt from Canterbury. As the officers exited their vehicle and followed the individuals on foot, and as they attempted to contact and detain the 3, first individual named Morales, first name David, male Hispanic, 32 years of age, fled westbound on Hoyt away from the officers. The officers gave chase and ended up following a foot pursuit. As Morales emerged from a sidewalk and as he walked into the street, He turned towards one of the officers reportedly and pointed what appeared to be a firearm in their direction, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. Officers sought cover by a parked vehicle and broadcast an officer need help call. During the officer-involved shooting, the other two individuals, Gonzalez, first name is Kimberly, female Hispanic, 26 years of age, and Mercado, first name Mercado, male Hispanic, 42 years of age, fled from the immediate area. Responding units established a perimeter, and a short time later, Mercado was taken into custody by officers without further incident. Metropolitan Division Special Weapons and Tactics team, as well as a canine search team, responded to the incident. And during a subsequent search of the perimeter, both Morales and Gonzalez were taken into custody. David Morales was transported to a nearby hospital for a minor abrasion to his left leg that occurred during a canine contact during his arrest. He was treated by the medical staff and was deemed okay to book on a murder charge or attempt murder charge at a nearby jail. Gonzalez was transported to another hospital in the area and where she was treated for, again, a canine bite to her right leg. She was treated and deemed okay to book for 148A of the Penal Code. One officer received minor hand and knee abrasions during a fall that was sustained during the officer-involved shooting. A search of the area conducted by a number of canine resources and personnel failed to identify or recover a firearm that we believed was involved. A 2019 gray Honda Civic that had been reported stolen out of the Van Nuys area was recovered nearby and was the subject of this investigation. Detectives from Force Investigation Division responded to the scene and are investigating the incident. Last night, we issued an updated press bulletin that included a video snippet from a Ring doorbell or video capture from a residence that showed and reflected the activities on the street in front of that residence. And in that depiction includes Mr. Morales, a person we believe to be Mr. Morales, and his actions immediately preceding the officer-involved shooting. So that our efforts in providing that video was to update it as this investigation unfolds, as the evidence that we're gathering continue to. This whole entire matter is being brought before the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office today for filing consideration of what criminal charges these three individuals will face. With this third officer-involved shooting, that in this instance, no one was struck. That represents 3 this year. The number last year was 2 at this time. There have been these 2 fatal officer-involved shootings that we spoke of earlier. Last year, that number was 0. The 4-year averages, we have just over 1 officer-involved shooting on a 4-year average by this time of year on a streamlining of taking all officer-involved shootings and dividing them across the course of the year. And over the fatalities, it's just less than 1 fatality in this early days of this year. Transitioning over to our crime picture, we continue to see a trending in a positive way for fewer homicides and shooting violence, with an overall reduction in both violent crime, property crime. In regards to homicides, we have 11 fewer homicides year to date than last year. That's 17 versus 28. Our violent crimes, we have 219 fewer violent crimes with reductions in each of the categories for a 13.1% reduction. In regards to property crime, we also are seeing a slower rate of property crimes in the first 3 weeks of this year, which is still early. And that is a 972 fewer property crimes, which is a 16.8% reduction. Overall Part 1 crime reduction of 16%. Now, the shooting victims, we have had 50 shooting victims year to date versus 89 last year. So that's a 44% reduction. So these are very promising numbers, with exception of when I look back to 2019, again, it's very early in the year, our shooting violence from the pre-pandemic era is still higher, both in the shots being fired, shooting victims themselves, as well as homicides. Also an aggravated assault, so the rate of individuals involved in some type of assault, whether it's with or without a firearm, compared to 2019, is up just under 6%. So we are by no means in a clear path here of success. We're working with all of our areas to provide for instruction partnerships, coalitions of building preventive measures, as well as identifying those few individuals we believe responsible for the majority of crime, identifying them and bringing them before the criminal justice system. And that work will continue. But I am happy to report, it is a good start and a continuation of crime numbers that we saw in November and December of last year. So the trends are going in the right direction compared to the last year, particularly the last 2 years. Lastly, moving over to our personnel strength, there's been no change since my earlier reported numbers at 9,232 sworn members. That's 228 fewer sworn personnel within the organization. 2,657 of our sworn professional staff, civilian professional staff. That's 48 underneath our authorized strength. We have 408 reserve officers and 2,298 volunteers, which I'm grateful for their work in helping the city be safe. With that, that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions or your comments.
Thank you, Chief. Chief, I'd like to discuss with you for a moment briefly the department's policy with respect to tasers, specifically whether or not there's any limitations on, its usage that's within the policy. That an officer in encountering someone, they have only so many number of times that they can use it. Is there anything like that that the department has?
So in our taser policy, which is considered a less lethal device and an alternative to more potentially lethal applications of force, it offers an officer the ability to overcome resistance, and particularly active or a violent individual. And with that, as we train our officers in the deployment of that device, there's a placement of where those taser darts or probes are to be centered. And there's also an application called a drive stun, where the nature of the altercation is such that the officer does not have distance away from the individual to use the preferred method, which is the probe. The probe method provides for a muscular incapacitation, whereas the drive stun is a pain compliance. It does not actually accomplish the muscular incapacitation that the taser use of the probes is designed to achieve. As the application of whether it be the probes or the drive stun, officers the policy is for officers to continually evaluate whether or not they are achieving the desired results, which is overcoming resistance and ability to place a person into custody, and recognize that the number of activations as they increase, so does the potential of risk of that system, or representative of the risks of the altercation, because it's continuing at a velocity and an intensity that could pose a health issue for the individual that we're attempting to overcome their resistance and take them to custody. So while as a department we have no limit as far as the number of taser activations, we follow them closely and we evaluate the activation of each one. So a taser will be used where a taser and its initial activation is good for a 5-second use of an electrical discharge, whether that's in a probe mode or a drive stun. At that point, and as you may refer back to videos that show the taser being deployed, the officer will hear and others will hear an audible beeping series. That is to tell the officer and others that cycle has ended. At that point, the officer can reactivate that device for an additional 5 seconds if the individual continues in their active resistance. And yet the officer is cautioned that further activations, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so forth, that they are to continually evaluate whether they should transition to a different use of force, a different approach to achieve the results, which is to gain the person's compliance and successfully take the person into custody. Now, I'm aware, and as a department, we're aware, and I sit on the Police Executive Research Board for PERF, that PERF, as well as IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, have best practices regarding the use of a taser or electronic control device. And I believe that their policy is that they limit them to 3 activations. Our policy historically has been to evaluate and hold officers accountable to each activation. And currently we are monitoring that over the last years, 200 use of the taser. The average number of activations in each use was just over 2.16. Now, we did have some outliers, that meaning the instances in the single digits that went into 3, 4, 5, 6 or more taser activations. And my discussions with the Axion Corporation and their CEO, we're exploring currently limiting and putting a limit on the taser device as to the total number of activations before the device will essentially be cooling off, or it would have a stoppage where the device would no longer continue to discharge additional activations for a 1 minute buffer or 2 minute buffer. And now this is an ongoing conversation as we analyze the most recent reports and the most recent incident involving the use of the taser in regards to the in-custody death involving Mr. Anderson. So the department we are considering changes to our policy, looking at evaluating whether that limit, if you will, would be effective. But yet we also don't know, because of the delay in the results of the autopsy, whether in this instance, the taser probe that was fired twice is our information that we have at this point. We believe that the darts did not, while they may have embedded in the clothing of Mr. Anderson, they did not touch his skin or have proved effective in getting the neuromuscular incapacitation. And the officer's account was that he then transitioned to the dry stun. We don't know that those 4 activations, that dry stun, if it contributed to his unfortunate death or did not, or if there was some other issue, including the physical altercation and or underlying health conditions that resulted in his tragic death. With that, though, I still believe it merits consideration of working with the manufacturer, working with our training and subject matter experts to consider establishing in light of overarching policy recommendations by the Police Executive Research Board, PERF, as well as IACP, and our own recognition that the vast majority of time officers are able to use this weapon effectively with 2 activations and not having to resort to a greater number.
Thank you, Chief. At this time, I'd like to direct the Inspector General to conduct a survey of other major metropolitan area police departments, their use of the taser and the policies that they employ, and then marry that to our current policy as well as what PERF recommends. And please work with the use of force committee of the police commission to come up with recommendations for the commission.
Absolutely, Commissioner. We're prepared to do that. Just for what it's worth, I know that the OIG has looked at taser usage and repeated usage to some degree in the past, but it has been a number of years. And to echo the chief's comments just a moment ago, in my opinion, it certainly is ripe for a deeper look. And so we're prepared to meet your request.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Soboroff, any questions?
I just want to add, I think you've covered it 3 ways from Sunday, but our policy, which is only a 1.5 years old, at the end of the day, in light of recent events, what we've learned, what you've discussed, if the Inspector General feels or the department chief feels or we feel that policy needs to be further updated, even though it's only 1 year old, I think that would be, I think you've said it, but I just want to say it again. That's where we're going with this. Is that correct?
Yes, Commissioner
Okay.
Soboroff, to your question, yes, I want the commission to do a deep dive into this to see whether or not we need to modify our policy consistent with best practices nationwide.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Inspector General. That's the way to do it.
Commissioner Kalanche, any questions for the chief? No questions. Commissioner Bonner, any questions for the chief?
Yes, please. A couple a comment and a couple questions. First, the comment. By the way, I was going to note, Chief, you mentioned our participation in the MLK parade a week ago, Monday, I guess. And I just wanted to mention, it's, those are always, I think, a good opportunity to join in the celebration of Martin Luther King's legacy and so on. But for me also, what I look for, what I reflect on as we participate in those events is you have, I think it's a 3-mile or so route through predominantly Black and Brown communities in the state, in South LA. And you have a pretty broad cross section of people who come out of their homes, who are walking on the streets, people come from other neighborhoods and so on. And so it's an opportunity, at least as a commissioner, to hear directly the kinds of, to see and hear the reaction to the officers in the department and even you as the chief. And I just note that fortunately it was, I was pleased to see that it was, I would say, an overall decidedly positive reception. Most of the people were, waving with all fingers. I mean, we got the finger from 2 little girls, I think, I recall, who recall seeing, but there's mostly positive reaction. People were thanking the department for the service and the presence in the community. I do acknowledge that, we heard also people calling out, stop killing, stop beating up people, things of that nature. And so for me, I try to, not simply be intoxicated with the positive reaction, which is what, you always hope for. But I think it's important also to take note of, the bottom line is not unconditional support, if you will. It's, people are saying on balance that they want you to hear and be mindful of use of force and these officer involved shootings and the need to be in the community, but to be there as a positive force and be there safely. So I just want to make sure that I note that we were hearing those comments as as well as the words of appreciation and support. The other thing that I wanted to ask, this is following up a little bit on the conversation about the tasers that and those questions. And I think I heard you mention that one of the things that is it PERF, I believe you said, that's looking at a potential technology solution that might come into play at some point. And I think that's important to understand and pursue. But there's also, the human element of it as well. And that's why I wanted to ask a little bit about. And I'm loath always to ask questions that, suggest we're getting ahead of ourselves and into something that's going to come to us. And so I'm going to ask this really in the context of the situation that happened in Memphis. This was, I think, a young man named Tyree Nichols, I believe. This was the young Black man who was essentially beaten to death by the 5 Black police officers, I believe. And the question that I have there is, in the one case, we're talking this morning about tasers and potentially, multiple use of the taser and how to contain that or control that. But I'm concerned about the human element of, you hear this sometimes referred to as the herd mentality, the pack mentality, whatever you want to call it. But if the idea is when you have a group of people together who are sometimes engaged in a highly charged interaction, adrenaline flowing, all the rest, that sometimes, the dynamic kind of takes on a life of its own, if you will, and may result in, and I don't know whether that's happened in that other case or not. I know nothing about the facts there. My question really is, how does police training avoid or address that issue? It's one thing to, and I suppose maybe one reason you're going to look at the technology is because maybe there's a concern that you can only get so far with the human element, and so you've got to address it through technology. But if you could comment really at least on what efforts are made and how that's addressed in training to make sure that officers in that kind of situation aren't at risk of just kind of, trolling into excessive force.
Certainly, and the case you're referring to involving this young man's tragic death is in Memphis, Tennessee. And I spoke with Chief Davis over the weekend regarding the circumstances, and it's a very tragic set of circumstances where the information that they have relative to the officer's actions, it appears clearly abusive and improper. I know that we're following that case very closely to understand it, as well as looking to a point of when the video of the actual subsequent altercation, the last altercation, took place. That was captured on video, is my understanding, and that will be released publicly in the coming days. That is an active investigation, as you indicated, with also involving the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and its local district attorney's office. The point that you make is that as officers get into a highly stressful situation and tumultuous, what is our training to keep each individual within their own resources focused on restraint, de-escalation, our policies, our procedures, our reverence for human life. And yet when one or others in that group begin losing that perspective, how do we train and provide for others to intercede? And as you attended and others are active law enforcement bystander training, that is exactly the purpose of that department-wide training that the Los Angeles Police Foundation supported with a generous funding that has allowed us to partner with Georgetown University and their instructors to come and deliver a day-long course in talking about the concepts of active law enforcement bystander training, which speaks to our duty to intercede. Not only is that now a state law, but from a physiological standpoint, what are the things that stand in the way when you're in such a tumultuous circumstance that from a psychology, from just a mindset that might keep you from stepping into a situation and exercising restraint or caution and pulling people back where others seemingly are not seeing the need for that. And this is the concept I'll paraphrase of that you are your brother's keeper. And so this training, which I attended in its entirety as well as every senior command staff of this department, will be brought across the entire organization. And it's done very effectively because it recognizes that this is not a police condition, that this is a condition of us as an existence of people, that the hesitancy to at times be a person to speak out and contrarian voice to things that are on a path going in any direction is real. And that hesitation, though, can cause untoward and terrible consequences. We see problematic behavior on a personal basis, whether it's in our family or friends and our neighborhood, and yet we don't want to be the one to speak up. And not in doing so, we believe we're going to embarrass ourselves, or we may embarrass someone else or face ridicule. And this training is fashioned in that manner, that as its application of those tendencies or those hesitancies to its real implications in policing, not just in excessive force, but even in other problematic behavior and or behavior that has an impact on officers' well-being and their very health and welfare. And so this is an investment that the organization is very much geared to accomplish in this calendar year. I think it's training that will help reinforce the expectations. And while this type of expectation has existed in law enforcement during my career, I think that this is very effective training in renewing our commitment to one another, that we're going to take care of each other by being an active bystander, and by actively working to ensure that whether it be a use of a taser device or any use of force. I'm reminded of a recent critical incident video where an officer's elbow and forearm is near at the threshold of a neck and shoulder blade of an individual they're attempting to take into custody. And another officer on scene says, partner, your elbow or your arm, and effectively was communicating and did cause the individual that was the officer that was engaged in this struggle to readjust his hand. That is active law enforcement bystander training on a most macro or instant manner, but it's one that we want to see not just on use of force, but into the conduct of officers when they engage people on the street in a traffic stop, when they engage in their personal practices of perhaps the way they cope with stress and turmoil. And that means that the use of alcohol or the family type of relationships that can dissolve, that officers play like a peer counselor, play a greater role in understanding their importance in those conversations.
Well, you just say that because, and I also, I attended the first 4 hours of the ABLE training and was very impressed and looking forward to the second half of it when it becomes available. But of course, that's something that's rolling out, now. So one would hope that for all the reasons you just indicated, that would be very helpful going forward. But when you think about, like what's happening right now, where, people are on the streets on patrol as we speak. And I know we as a commission have asked that this duty to intercede be evaluated as a specific element in the officer involved shootings and the categoricals that we review. So I know we'll be reviewing it, but of course, even that's, after the fact as well. So I'm just wanting some assurance that because this dynamic is not something new, right? I mean, the risk is not new. Is what I'm saying, that you would have a group of officers, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, in this case 5, that I have this challenge. And so I just be looking for some additional assurance that this particular element, is trained on in some way, that there is some way to help manage the situation. I'm aware, I've seen the supervisors in some case where, you rely on the supervisor to do that. But it just strikes me that between the taser issue and other uses of force, that we need to make sure that there is a mindset, that officers are able to maintain in these situations, so that we don't have what I refer to as, the herd mentality, but it may be properly referred to something else.
So if I might, this is a philosophy that is not recently adopted by the organization. Our risk management training in regards to our partnership with Pepperdine University has talked about interventions and early interventions by work units that don't allow workplace turmoil to spiral. We changed the pursuit policy years ago, that holding those officers accountable not only for their decision to initiate a pursuit, but for their decision to continue a pursuit. We've supervisors on scene and dispatched on whether it be edge weapons, or why we dispatch a supervisor to that, why every pursuit and a backup has a supervisor issued. One of the conversations I had with Chief Davis was that absence of a supervisor at that scene following an initial use of force, and how 20 minutes later, there still wasn't a supervisor there. And certainly as an organization, we want active supervision and leadership. That's one of the conversations I had just yesterday in our general staff meeting, was the expectation that our sergeants and lieutenants are actively involved in dynamic situations, stressful ones, to add another bit of clarity and ensure that the policies and procedures of the organization are adhered to. But lastly, it comes down to every single officer, and why we have 2 officers in the field working a unit. It's because we depend on both of them and both their mindsets to balance and to keep for perspective of what their purpose is, what the department's training and expectations are, and they work together so that if one's getting, is losing perspective or getting a bit of tunnel vision, the other can help slow that situation down. And I've seen that in repeated instances of stressful situations where later looking back at body worn, they're giving that feedback loop one with the other. So the ABLE training is just the most recent example of our effort to reinforce this concept of a contact cover, of working together as a team. We see this, you'll hear this as you have with our graduations, that the moment a recruit comes in this organization, it's no longer them as an individual, that is, they're working as a team, they're part of an effort together towards working in partnerships and working collaboratively to provide for safety and to work for the shared responsibility of public safety. So with that, that comes that shared group, which has the potential, as you indicated, for a groupthink or a mindset of the road to Abilene that nobody really wants to go to, but no one's willing to step into that conversation. That concept was, goes back to the 50s as far as how groupthink occurs and what the dynamics of it is. It's also a lesson within our leadership, 21st century leadership, for every watch commander and supervisor. So it's reinforced on a number of different points, but I'm also mindful that that's a perpetual matter that we have to continue to be a part of and find positive attributes of when it occurs to reinforce its importance.
Appreciate that. One last question, Chief, and this relates to the recent directive on the Blue Lives Matter flag. And this, I don't, and I'm confessing I know a little bit about the flag and the history, just what I've read online before and since the directive, but I'm certainly not an authority on it. But this strikes me as we've talked before about diversity, and this strikes me as also an issue of thought diversity, diversity of thought and perspective, where people have different and are entitled to have different views of these kinds of things and what they mean and so on. So I certainly don't want to be in that role of policing, to use a term, what people ought to think about the symbol or the flag or not. And I'm going to assume that it's a range of thoughts from people who've not really given much thought to it, to people who have and draw their own conclusions and so on. My question to you is this very point, like, is this a point of discussion? I'm thinking now, having issued a directive that, at least according to public reports, may sit differently with different people in the organization. Is it the subject of ongoing discussion in this kind of situation where, the risk is that you put it out there, people react to it, and there's just a range, uncontrolled burn of perspectives and opinions and attitudes about it? It's, I think, a risk. The other thing you also can't do is tell people what to think about it, so to speak, but you can hopefully facilitate constructive dialogue and encourage others throughout the chain of command to encourage constructive dialogue, not with the goal of having a conclusion, but at least to offer understanding and that opportunity for understanding. So you mentioned your general staff meeting, for example. I'm just understanding, when you issue that kind of directive, do you expect and encourage and even direct that there be discussion about it to enhance understanding and perspectives, or do you, as chief, issue the directive and simply expect compliance?
Well, certainly not the latter. The culture eats policy for lunch or breakfast, whichever meal you prefer. But in instance of here, let me first of all start with the fact that this was not a new policy. The department, as a matter of practice, has authorized items that are in our front lobbies, in the public spaces of when people walk in. And our U.S. flag, the flags that are shown behind me, these are the flags of this department. And there's also the flags of our city, as well as our state and our country. And the context is really unambiguous. The blue line flag is a flag that has come from years and centuries ago, that dealt with conflict and the bravery, the valor of forces, then military, fighting against the oppressors, fighting against the enemy, if you will, and their dedication. Well over 50, 60 years ago, it transitioned into a blue line, meaning the thin blue line, the LAPD, the law enforcement, as a line against those that would prey upon others, a line of protection, a line of dedication, and a line that has come at a great sacrifice. More than 22,000 men and women, members of law enforcement, have died in the service of this country in the noble profession of law enforcement. And that flag means to me what it means, I'm sure, to every one of those families that have lost a loved one, which is that this is a craft, this is a profession that a chosen few, and far too few have stepped into to dedicate their lives in a service to others, and to be willing to sacrifice that to protect someone they don't know, over a matter that is maybe trivial, but nonetheless, they're called upon to step forward. So that thin blue line means to me the devotion, the sacrifice, the dedication of not just those that have fallen, 238 men and women of this organization who've sacrificed their life for this city, but also the 9,000 plus that are out there right now, and every retiree that's ever done this work. But that meaning to me, and why I hold it hardly, the love for this profession and the people who are engaged in this very difficult work, is not universal any more than a religious symbol is universal to every walk of life in America. And so the context is really important. The context of that flag in a roll call room or a workspace is clear. But the context of that in a front lobby could offer others who see it as a symbol of extremism, of a far right, of organizations that have tried to hijack it for their own nefarious purposes, is a dog whistle or a message to others that we somehow affirm, or we somehow agree or silently agree, at least in some aspect of their terrible agenda. So the front lobby is not a place for that flag, in my view. But that's not a new policy. That's just been the establishment. And we had a couple instances in which people, perhaps unaware, thought that they would proudly display it. And I asked for that to be removed, as I would ask for a religious symbol to be removed. Not because, as a Christian myself, I have anything against the cross that demonstrates Christianity. But it's not appropriate to be on a uniform of a Los Angeles police officer or in front lobby of this department. And the reason for that is for all of my brothers and sisters who are Jews or those that are Muslims, Sikhs, and others, that their religious symbols have the equal standing and they shouldn't be viewed as weapons. And many people will say, well, blue line is not a religious symbol. Then I would differ. I think it speaks for the very values of law enforcement. And it speaks to us for that and as to what we represent and for those who believe in us, it says that. But to others, it says a very terrible, they're a very terrible truth to them. So just as religious symbols have and do. So with that, I'm just affirmed what the expectations. Now, having said that, I recognize that this touched a nerve, number of people, both past and present within the organization and others. And so we have been talking about this as recently as yesterday with every command officer in this organization. But prior to that, we've had a number of conference calls and discussions, and I visited the Rampart Station and spoke with the officers working the front desk and delivered a United States flag to be proudly posted over that desk. And I believe that that flag has a place in our workplace, and officers wearing it when they're off duty or they're not in an official capacity dealing with the public. But in this instance, I believe that there is an importance that we draw this line at this point. It is a divisive topic. It's one that I find members of the media have misspoken about, have jumped to conclusions and expanded to say and this entire weekend, we had a number of calls from our media relations that had to correct the record that said that the department had banned its use in any fashion or form. And that's unfortunate because that only continues to inflame those that, to your point, believe that this is wrong. They've not spent a lot of time. They're relying upon media sources for information. And I understand their frustration. And I would just ask and I welcome this opportunity that you brought up here by me expounding a bit on myself and how I feel about it as a chief, as an individual. It flies at my home. I have worn it in events involving fallen officers and their tribute. And I believe it's proper in that sense. But my uniform will wear the United States flag as it should. And that's what my expectations, and those are the expectations of the department that precede me, and when I expect that we'll move forward.
I appreciate that. And just closing, I'd say that you mentioned, the range of misperceptions and so on. And even I think I refer to it as the Blue Lives Matter flag, I believe, right, in some discussions, in part because you see, at least as others have written and talked about it, they've created the perception that it is you have Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, all of those terms that have been conflated in different contexts, in different meanings, and this is just one of them. So even as I learn about it, just want to encourage you as well to facilitate discussion, not to tell anybody what they should think about it, but just so that everybody has an opportunity to learn and draw their own conclusions. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Decker.
Thank you, Commissioner Briggs. Chief, first, thank you for all the responses you have provided today to all my colleagues. I did want to follow up on the use of a taser and specifically in response to Commissioner Briggs's questions, you asked or you referred to, I think, the assessment that happens with respect to a taser. I think you refer to it as evaluate and hold. And I wonder if you could just explain that terminology and tactically what officers are taught in that regard.
So the policy directive or the training bulletin is that to continually evaluate the effectiveness of the tool. And what that means is it achieving its desired results? And the desired results is that it's going to allow officers to overcome resistance and take a person safely into custody, generally handcuff an individual. The person's potentially armed with a knife or other weapon, or if they're physically fighting and using bodily force, kicks and punches and wrestling, grappling type stuff, type maneuvers. It's meant for that activation as a standoff weapon to allow us not to have to approach an individual and grapple with them, recognizing that escalation involves risks of injuries not only to the offender, but also to the officers involved. So that's the purpose of the taser darts, if you will, that allow a standoff distance and afford the officers not have to approach. Secondly, the taser darts allow for a neuromuscular incapacitation, which essentially locks the person into like a skeletal frame. And that way, the person cannot actively attack in a sense of a coordinated fashion with a tool or weapon that they might have. But it also is used in a drive stun where lacking that neural incapacitation, it's meant to get what's called pain compliance with the officer's directions, that the person will cooperate and provide their hands, will stop their active resistance. A continually evaluate is if those results aren't being achieved, then after repeated applications of that device, the officer is to consider transitioning to another force option, because that is not working. Now, what we don't define is whether that's 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Now, about 7 to 8 years ago, as I recall, we had instances in which the tasers were being used much more frequently, not only in a individual use, but repeated activations. And that's where modifications to the training, as well as the standards, came about, as well as the tool itself. So I do think that it's appropriate now to go back and look at that body of work, to look at the capabilities of the current system, which allows, and whether we're allowed, working with the manufacturer, to put a stop on it, a limit, governor, if you will, that stops it after a certain number, and what that number is. I referenced the perf number, and I referenced IACP, what they come down on as far as 15 seconds of activation. Is that the right number? And then, or is there another device, an evolution of the current Taser 7? And there's a current new prototype model of called a Taser 10. I guess the numbers keep moving up like an Apple phone, but that doesn't have a drive stun. And what does that look like? Because the drive stun is an issue that it's pain compliance, it's neuromuscular incapacitation doesn't work in that device. So should we move to the use of a weapon system that eliminates the drive stun as a capability by enhancing and going to a new weapon system that offers even greater stand back distance? The Taser 10 is being reviewed internally now on a test basis. We're not using it in the field. We're not using it in any active deployment, and will not unless we come back before this board with a recommendation. But even the use of the Taser 10, which gives us a 45-foot, potential 45-foot distance, and allows us to place darts individually instead of the current array of shooting darts and looking for a 12-degree separation by the dynamics of the darts themselves. There's some, and it's a lesser voltage on the device as well. So we're currently evaluating that, as well as, in light of recent events, the use of the current system. How could it be modified, or should it be modified? And then lastly, we'll work closely with the Inspector General as to other agency practices as well. The Taser, and I'll close, has been a device that we have carried for nearly 40 years. And it has gone through an evolution of designs and capabilities. And generally, I'll say it's been an upward path of improvement. It has also, when we went to equipping every uniform officer with a Taser, which was about 8 years ago, we believe helped us give officers alternatives to having to resort to deadly force or more potential injury-prone uses of, like the baton, for instance, that would be an alternative to a Taser. So we wanted to give an officer a weapon system that's effective. We recognize the critics that remark that it's only effective, a little more than half the time. The reality is that no weapon system is effective 100% of the time. And many times the calculus on that is that you had to fire a second or third activation. And I'm reminded that in officer-involved shootings, that our shootings often involve more than one round being fired or more than one baton strike being applied. So these are conversations that I do think will benefit by us working with the Inspector General and with the Use of Force Subcommittee to fully explore, to have transparency with the department, with our public, and to build trust that whatever mechanism or evolution that goes forward, that it's our best efforts and our best intent to safeguard the lives of our people, as well as those that we come in contact with in difficult and trying circumstances.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Commissioner Briggs.
Thank you, Commissioner Decker. At this time, we're going to go to public comment. Madam Secretary.
Okay, our first speaker is Ted Trubinsky.
Good morning. Items 1, 3A, 3C, 4, and public comment.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Item 1, I think it's very strange for the chief to honor MLK Jr. In the future, if you'd like to honor Dr. King, don't celebrate him with a parade. Instead, show up monetarily, working to desegregate LA, or keep listening to the public as we urge you to divest from brutal policing tactics. Item 3A, while body cams seem like a good idea, the collaboration with Axon Enterprise is a bad one. How can we trust a company to centralize and analyze cam footage whose bread and butter is manufacturing and selling tasers, especially after the murder of Keenan Anderson? I believe there's a conflict of interest here that should not be overlooked. This is the same company who only last year wanted to put tasers on drones, which seems to jump over all the questions Commissioner Bonner was just asking the chief today. Items 3C, we don't want more cop parties in our communities, especially those sponsored by LA Police Foundation. Item 4, this actually seems like a good update, especially considering devices used for the purpose of tracking the movement of a person and object have been commercially available for years. Yeah, that's great. For public comment, once again, I'm calling to reject the reappointment of Chief Moore. His failings include, but are not limited to, the bombing of South LA via the improper disposal of fireworks, which again resulted in the death of 2 citizens and the displacement of a whole neighborhood. The brutal tactics used to suppress the 2020 uprising, including violence. I saw officers escalate against non-protesters with my very own eyes, and the 2,500 ignored complaints of bias policing. Moore is not the leadership LA citizens want or deserve, as the public has made resoundingly clear over the past 2 meetings. Thank you for making the last special meeting regarding Chief Moore's reappointment at a more accessible time. I've heard urging for you to do that for years, so it's obvious you know that that's an important part of at least pretending to reflect the community's voice in policing. Unfortunately, due to the brevity of the comment period, we mostly heard from the same voices we hear from often. Even so, the message was resounding: no to the reappointment of Chief Moore. Unrelated, I'm requesting the removal of the thin blue line flag mural from the Hollywood PAL on Fountain and Cole. As a former Hollywood resident, I find the blatant public display of this imagery on the flip side of a children's mural pretty inappropriate for the same reasons the chief described in response to Commissioner Bonner today. I know I'm supposed to talk to City Council about to the Public Safety Committee today, but I'm still against acquiring and the deployment of the robot dog. In the face of more murders of citizens in the throes of mental health crises by the LAPD, the last thing we need is even higher powered weaponry in the hands of this department. In general, I'm against Special Order 11, and I'm deeply disturbed that this is the first item that the department obtained here. We talked about limited tasers today.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have T.
Hello,
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
all of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Power and strength to the families impacted by police violence. Most recently, Keenan Anderson, Tariq Smith, Oscar Sanchez. And y'all need to keep MLK's name out your mouth, because y'all hypocrites out here daily murdering Black and brown folks. Secondly, the taser. Your officer was clearly out of policy. All the officers involved in Keenan Anderson's murder, should be held accountable. Let me read you what I've discovered on the LAPD site. This is the use of force report from 2021. Taser 7. During the course of 2021 on to 2022, the department will transition to the Axon Taser 7. The Taser 7 is a 2-shot ECD device that was designed to improve the performance of previous Taser models, reducing the number of misses, closing disconnects, and the closed probe spreads. These issues were the most common reasons the Taser was ineffective in obtaining desired neuromuscular incapacitation, NMI. The Taser
Madam Secretary, did we lose T?
T's, oh, we did lose T, yes.
Please go to the next caller.
Okay, next speaker, Betty Lay.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
Chief's report, public comment, and agenda items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, well, first I need to start with deepest condolences to Deputy Sheriff Fallen Darrell, and condolences to the incident in Anaheim, the tragic loss of life in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. Also, yes, I do. I support Chief Moore on his second term. Like I said last week, everybody is not perfect. We've had chiefs before him that weren't perfect, but he's a good leader, and that's what we need. On public comments, well, first the agenda items, because I support 3B and 3C. And on public comments, I don't know what's happened to our society. The negative remarks is that they show no respect. The homicides, it's people of color that are killing each other. I don't understand. This is no fault of LAPD, no fault of Chief Moore. It seems to me that most kids today under the age of 40, they need to wake up and smell the coffee. You know, our society is going to hell, and that's not good. It all needs to, we all need to be the same. There's one race on this earth, and it's the human race. Please, everybody stay safe. I know that my entire family has been vaccinated, and my entire family still came down with COVID. So I don't see the point in it. But stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for the chance to be able to speak. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Philip Tabby.
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I could never understand why anyone would rally against the police until I became more involved with them. As with any large organization, you will have bad apples. With LAPD, those apples are mostly on top of the tree. Our top brass. Many are A1 people who still care about the community, and I'm happy to know them. But there are those, like Moore, who are just in it for themselves. Those people make things bad for the department and for the community. They play both sides of the fence. So in a way, I do understand the frustration for those wanting to abolish the police. Even those of us that support law enforcement have been treated poorly. To all Angelenos, my neighbors, we were here before Chief Moore took his position, and we will all be here when he is gone. There really is unity in community. We all have the same goal to keep our city safe. The corruption is not with you or I. It is within our city, our state, and even within the LAPD. Back in 1950, William H. Parker became the Los Angeles Police Department Chief of Police. Times were different, but he successfully rooted out the corruption within. A new respect and a symbol known as the Thin Blue Line was born. How ironic that the most corrupt chief of police in our time has not only torn down that line, but you have crossed it. And we are all here to say no more. You lie to communities just for your benefit. You move senior lead officers with zero community input. Is it true that under your watch, you promoted a senior lead officer to fill Cesar Contreras' old Sunland car? Is it true that you promoted a person to fill that position who made false allegations against Captain Smith that he allegedly was having an affair with the woman's coordinator in LAPD? The same Smith that you demoted and gave 10 days before the case was investigated and still not completed. You and anyone trying to cover your tracks are losing credibility fast. You tore down the thin blue line. What's next? Will you go tell the officers not to wear the LGBTQ flag pin on their uniforms because some religions find offense to it? You know, you said the blue line flag is like a religion to you. Are you going to take down the Bandera in front of headquarters? I certainly hope not. When we cannot trust our chief of police, we need a new chief, one that's respected, stands tall, and does not embarrass our city. Based on the numbers Moore gave 2023, the vaccinated are making up 83.42% of infections and what are vaxxed, and 16.5% are not vaxxed. You know, I'm not sure why you're reporting the numbers the way you did today. You still need to report on the 7.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 1264.
Hello, I'd like to speak on this chief's comments and public comment, please.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Chief Moore and the commissioners, Happy New Year. I hadn't seen you or heard from you in a while. We should have public meetings. I think we should get back to seeing each other. Right now, we have a problem with Foothill Division again. I don't understand how you cannot enforce lawlessness. We have people that are setting up businesses on our sidewalks, literally blocking the sidewalks, violating the public right-of-way, like you said, with your flag situation, they're having religious items on the public right-of-way. To me, that's not right. I mean, if you know, because everybody has their own religion, we should not, because everybody pays taxes, and we should abide by everybody who pays taxes. So we should not have that. And please say, "Oh, that's a First Amendment." That is not a First Amendment. You know that for a fact. You cannot put those things on the public right of way, but it's happening, and your officers are allowing it to happen. And because you're allowing this lawlessness to happen in my community, there was a person that had accosted a small girl in the bathroom of the church, for Christ. You know, it just you know, continues to happen. You continue to allow this riffraff to just come into the community and just take over. It is unacceptable. Please do something about it. Thank you, and try to have a nice day. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 3146.
Hello.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
Well, I'd like to speak for 3 minutes, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Addressing what's been said, because I had many things written down that I had to change, except for one. I want to mention that the foster care child protective services, how underfunded it is, and how, you know, the mess that that this creates for the LAPD and the city. It's really can't talk about it. But Briganometer Briggs, dude, did you notice that the chief didn't answer your question about the taser? This is an additional example of how U.S. law allows murder. The use of the taser is so vague. This murder may go unprosecuted as well. Briganometer, did you hear that answer to your question? I didn't hear it. There's some calls that said that you were the 59th in shooting, but you're first in murder. Nobody understands this, how you're first in murder, and neither did I. I didn't believe it. And it's finally coming into my awareness of what that sentence means. And see, I called today. I called to protect the officers. The only way to protect the citizen is to properly protect the officer. You've been talking about how many holes there are in some of the training in some of these areas, whether it be with the taser or the gun. And this is what I've called up and talked about. Let me see if I can read some of the things I was going to say today. Oh, what Eric did with Mike is the same as Nori, Kev, Ron, and Gil. So Eric wasn't telling us that they were picking Mike as the chief for weeks. It'd be a report, a couple weeks later, it'd be a report. Oh, we're picking at you months, 2 months in, 3 months in. Yeah, we're getting close on that one. I heard a report. I was like, man, yeah. And then really, they had already picked the chief. Behind closed doors, they were doing the same thing as Nori, Kev, Ron, and Gil. So I'm saying, and you five are the same people. You five should not be able to pick the chief. The mayor's gone that put you in place. He's gone. See, the chief, there's many chief, Mr. Chief, Chief Moore, Michael Moore, Chief. There are many conversations you won't enter into because you're scared and you don't know the answers and scared to tell the truth because they've got you in a bind the way U.S. law runs. I would never have done this to you. This is what $31 trillion of debt does. I would never have done this to you. This is not what my family fought for. This is not what my birth certificate stands for at all. What they did to me, this isn't what I stand for, what they're doing to you, okay? And this problem comes from the training. But I'm too smart, bro. I'm too aware to let this keep going on. This is why I call and I don't swear at you guys because I want something to change. You see, I keep putting myself out there. I get chewed up.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Matios Cadane.
Hello?
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First, I want to shout out the 2 little girls that flipped you off at the MLK Day Parade. You had no business being there. You're a disgrace to MLK. You actively abuse the people participating in the current iteration of the civil rights movement. But, you know, you do like use these spaces to legitimize yourself. And I want to point out that you went straight from the MLK conversation to talking about how you gathered a pastoral group to watch, you know, heavily produced, edited, narrated over body-worn video of our collective violence to get notes on what you can do better. When you have direct notes from the people directly impacted, from the family of those you've killed, telling you exactly what we want you to do, which is to stop killing people, divest your resources, abolish the police. These are our immediate demands. And I found it especially gross that you immediately segued from that to a conversation about a funeral of a deputy, somehow equivocating the 2 events. And that is before talking about how you shot someone new who had a weapon, but you couldn't find the weapon. It's just a false narrative of another sort. And I'm fairly certain this is an individual, you know, whose weapon you couldn't find, and yet you still charged with murder or attempted murder after the fact. Anyway, and this taser conversation, it's incredibly frustrating because by your own, you know, admission, the desired response is to overcome resistance, right? In so many words, you said the LAPD has no limits on how much you can use the taser. But what's especially frustrating is this notion that, you know, especially around the ABLE training conversation, that police officers are somehow slipping up and accidentally killing us, that this is a mistake of some sort. When in reality, it's not due to groupthink. It's due to something else that comes from the 50s, lynch mobs, Chief Moore, and that's what we're seeing today. That's still an active participation. We see these cops taking place in racist murders, and we have this board in place to obfuscate their intentions for racist violence as slip-ups that require more training, or sophistications in taser technology that require more resources. It's disgusting that these people are just racist. These cops are racist. They want to hurt people. They want to harm Black people specifically, and that's what they're doing. To that point, all the shit on the agenda today, you know, $1 million for, what is it, an expansion for, evidence.com, digital in-car video storage. All these things were put in place, all these big ticket items as accountability tools. All these policies were meant to protect us. They haven't. We're still being killed by police, right? What's happening now is that you get more resources. You get $1 million more bucks a week. And so no policy is going to protect us. No technology is going to protect us. We need to defund, abolish the police, because in Chief Moore's own words, culture eats policy for lunch. I yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Zach Sherwin.
Yes, all 3 minutes, please.
Okay.
And that was culture eats policy for lunch or breakfast or whatever your meal of choice is. I'd like to start by just pointing out a couple of minor errors that are part of the proceedings today. First of all, on the agenda for today's meeting, item 4A says that it is about, quote, electric surveillance equipment. And then, of course, when you open the linked PDF, this item's about electronic surveillance equipment, not electric, as the agenda says. And then during his comments, we heard the chief of our City of Angels refer to the company that manufactures tasers as, quote, Axion, as opposed to Axon, which is the actual name of the company. And, you know, these errors that I'm pointing out, they're pedantic and they're nitpicky, but I draw attention to them because I think that they are the tip of the iceberg, and that they're indicative of just sort of a general culture of incompetence, of a lack of desire, as well as ability to really do the best job possible. I think they're signs that this city does not have people in place who are doing the most careful and thoughtful jobs that they could do, which is unfortunate because despite its incompetence and buffoonery, the things that the LAPD does do and that you commissioners routinely fail to hold it accountable for doing are matters of life and death. The people who are, to be clear about my point, the people who are in place doing these awful things are also awful at it. Moore, that speech about the Blue Lives Matter flag was absurd. You know, we just spend our time in this meeting hearing the chief launch into this corny, sentimental word salad, and it's as egregious as the excessive amount of time that we had to spend listening to it. You know, based on like the total amount of time spent, you would think that that's the most important issue facing this city. Meanwhile, there's this $1 million grant for more surveillance of our communities, which is gonna, again, help these evil ass cops do a better job of doing this terrible thing that disproportionately impacts people of color and poor people. There's so many issues facing this city right now that to hear Chief Moore, you know, really get his temper and his spirits high to talk about this Blue Lives Matter flag issue is just absurd. Commissioners, Dale Bonner is the only one of you who ever even makes a pretense of asking substantive questions. Unfortunately, we know from the past that he shares his tough questions with the chief in advance, but just to call out the extent to which the rest of you don't even go through the motions. We don't have any expectations that you're going to provide meaningful oversight or ask the tough questions, but with all the things that you could talk about with this chief, hearing you just cruise right past the opportunity to bring up so many of them is worth mentioning and condemning. Start having your meetings in person again. I just hold this board in the lowest possible esteem. I think you're despicable people and should be ashamed of yourself. Same for you, Chief.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Evangeline.
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
During last Tuesday's special board meeting regarding the reappointment of Chief Moore, there was an overwhelming majority of callers who do not want him reappointed. Only 3 people out of the about 60 callers want him reappointed. So about 57 don't want him. I'll say it again. Chief Moore has repeatedly caved into political pressure, which has resulted in decreased officer morale, decreased recruitments, decreased arrests, and increased crime. Chief Moore is guilty of taking a knee with Black Lives Matter while police officers were being attacked, mandating COVID shots and not giving police officers medical choice, focusing on identity politics, taking away pretextual stops, unjustly moving officers such as Flo Contreras and Captain Smith to make Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez happy, getting drunk and intoxicated in public, allowing LA City Council members who defunded LAPD to have him on speed dial if they ever need police help, while the rest of us have to wait a long time. Now, Chief Moore has ordered all thin blue line flags be removed from public view, including police station lobbies where fallen officers are memorialized. This directive came the same day as the police commission meeting when a prominent Black Lives Matter Los Angeles leader complained about that flag and demanded it be taken down. This is another example of Chief Moore pandering to BLM instead of backing the LAPD officers and us common citizens who support police and want more police, not less, to protect us. Chief Moore didn't even sleep on it. What kind of leader is that? Moore is reactive instead of proactive. This is a lose-lose. He lost respect from police officers and the public, and BLM activists are not going to change their minds and support him all of a sudden. Chief, you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth because you later clarified that the flag represents violent extremist views, that it's oppressive and it's undemocratic. The thin blue line flag is not racist or bigoted, just like the firefighter flag with the red line isn't. It unites our support for police officers, those who have died in the line of duty and those who risk their lives every time they put on the uniform. It's not a flag that divides, but rather unites us despite our skin color or political affiliation. When we call 911, we don't care what race, religion, or sexual identity the officer is. We just need help. Do you think you'll get more or less recruits as a result of this erroneous decision? What's next? No pink ribbons for breast cancer awareness? Proud Boys also display the American flag. Are you going to ban American flags too? Some are offended by the American flag after all, so why don't we take those down too? Chief Moore should not capitulate or negotiate with these extremists. Please recommend a new chief who will stand by LAPD officers instead of demeaning them. I do not think Deputy Chief Hamilton would be a good pick. Please don't pick him. He has been caught in lies when speaking with the community, and it seems like he cares more about protecting the chief and pleasing the city council than being honest.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Steve Rogers.
Good morning. All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I'll second what the last speaker said. She said in a very articulate, thoughtful way and hit many good points. Let me start off by saying also, all lives matter. All lives matter, including blue lives. Regarding the thin blue line flag, to have a person go into Rampart Station representing BLM, which I call Bolshevist lying Marxists, and be talking about how the thin blue line flag has been hijacked by extremists, specifically the Proud Boys. That's ridiculous. Like the other caller said, what if they're carrying the American flag? Are we going to remove the American flag? The reasoning is not there. That's a problem. And the chief made a snap decision, it sounded like, to remove the flag because other people might think that it's representing extremism. By the way, take a look at the Proud Boys website. They're being maligned. That's not fair. And I believe in fairness. I believe in being fair to Chief Moore. He has been vilified unjustly by many people here who speak out of hatred. They call the LAPD and Chief Moore murderers and racists. That's just not accurate. Okay, that's not fair. We should be about fairness. We should be about public safety. So the thin blue line should be in the lobby, the thin blue line flag of every station. That represents what the chief himself knows it represents. And Bolshevist Lives Matter, that's the group that's really extreme and violent and really is a problem with the all and taking a knee. It goes back to that. That's the second time taking a knee. Regarding the 3 incidents, the Sanchez, Smith, and Anderson, I highly encourage people to take a look at the videos yourself. Take a look. There was extreme attempts by the LAPD officers to de-escalate and verbalize. They did an excellent job. Let's remember when force is used, most cases, who's responsible for the use of force? It's the individual and their actions, their behavior. They're under the influence of cocaine, alcohol, committing crimes, trying to flee, resisting. Don't resist detention or arrest. You would be alive if you do that. The police are protecting the public. Blessed are the peacemakers. They should be called the children of God. The police commission, you need to get out there, listen to the officers at roll calls, listen to the public. What are they saying? Not hateful ideologues that come on to this police commission meeting and repeat the same buzzwords and nonsense. Listen to reality, listen to the police officers and close roll calls. Talk to victims of crime, get the real information about what's going on out there. So condolences to the victims of crime, including Monterey Park and the officers killed in line of duty.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Javier Hermosillo.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
The agenda and other items have been discussed.
3 minutes.
The last fellow spoke about the tasing incident, and I think that we those in our community who have looked at it, or perhaps saw it live, or the department's version, or whoever's version, I think that we have seen once again that people who are under the influence of drugs or psychological issues, whatever, tend to be less responsive to reality and more combative. And I like many other people have seen all the videos, and they show the officer saying to the guy, "Hey, calm down, man, calm down," and trying to do that, but he clearly was in a different world. And it's always, those of us that don't deal with that on a regular basis don't really understand the physicality of people, not just suspects, people who are under the influence of something, and they have enormous strength, and they're not listening and not in the right mind. And I think that we have to, really focus on that, because a lot of people that are calling, there's just hate calls, and probably comes close to becoming a hate crime on the part of some of these callers. Number two, thin blue line issue. Thank you, Chief, because I was one of those people who early on didn't understand why you did that, but after you explained it, it certainly makes sense. Now, we have a complex and diverse community here in Los Angeles, which has always been a positive, but more and more it's becoming a mixed bag or negative, because we have these tribal fights between pro-police, anti-police, pro-religion, anti-religion, etc. And with the diversity of Los Angeles, I think this is the downside that we see. Now, somebody mentioned the merchants blocking sidewalks and stuff. That's a huge problem down here in Harbor Division, and they cleared an area over in Wilmington, that Pacific Coast Highway and Figueroa, right next to the freeway. And what they did is they moved to another part of town, and I'm not sure how it is that we control that, but that continues to be problematic all over the city. And on the reappointment, all the comments that were made or submitted, it was interesting to note that of the 103 comments that were online as was written, 75 were identical. So it's obviously, a movement. And the last thing I want to say is that we're not first in murder, we're 56th in the.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have G6.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
I would like to speak on all.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So, first of all, this commission over the years, this is Michael Williams, by the way, and most of you all don't remember me. So, Brock, you remember me. I told you that I would see you off of this council, and I would keep coming until you left, because this council and commission, for the years that it has been enacted, has been one that just rubber stamps anything that comes down the line. If it comes from police brass, if it comes from the top of the city, they just rubber stamp it. And there's no real investigations. There's no real dialogue or concern about whether or not what they're doing actually affects the well-being of Los Angeles as a whole. I'm hoping, because there has been rare occasions that you all have tried to do something good. And I'm hoping that this is one of them. You sat here and listened to Chief spin, Chief talk, give reasons for why his failures are not failures. And he does this a lot. He comes on every time there is something that the LAPD does under his purview, under his control. He comes out and tries to spin it. Instead of just saying, you know what, the LAPD is a flawed system. It's been flawed since the 90s, starting with Rodney King to the Rampart scandal. You just had officers, okay, found out that they were falsely inputting data into gang databases, falsely putting people into gang databases. You just had an investigation that showed and found out that you were abusing and violating the rights of people who were protesting. The very people that are carrying on the legacy of a man that you keep bringing up, Martin Luther King, who were doing the same things that Martin Luther King advocated for, that you said had their blood on their hands. This is this man. All this was under his purview. So instead of him coming out and saying this is a fault in the system, this is a fault with LAPD, and I'm going to do and make radical changes in order to make sure that this stuff does not continue to go on, he comes in, spins, excuses, talks and talks and talks, but when the metrics show up, when the metrics are shown, it seems like he doesn't do anything at all. Get rid of this man. Do not lend your support to him.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have MJ King.
Good morning.
Good morning. What items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Week after week, Chief Moore makes excuses for LAPD violence against community members. He finds excessive force and murder in policy. What changed this month? LAPD killed 3 community members in need of mental health care in the first 6 days of the year. What changed, Chief? The fact that there's no possible defense for killing folks in need of mental health care? Suddenly, Chief Moore is calling for more mental health responders. In the January 10th meeting, Chief Moore suggested LAPD wait for mental health responders to arrive or wait to figure out what someone's experiencing before escalating the situation. Were those 3 deaths indefensible, or was Chief Moore saying whatever he could to save face ahead of his reappointment? Today in the Chief's report, you're suggesting that you need to put a safety on the taser because your own officers can't follow policy to monitor between applications and not stun more than twice. I call on this commission to ask questions about how this department is responding to those who ask for help. As horrible as these tragedies are, they're preventable. The Times reported that the person who committed the mass shooting in Monterey Park went to the local PD for help twice in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. We've seen this in other mass shootings and also in cases of domestic violence and other homicides where the victims are turned away when asking for help at their local PD. Does LAPD have a policy to connect people with resources to support them, or do they just turn them away? Do we have adequate resources to offer community members, or is LAPD's budget eating up all of our resources? This commission has to think outside of the information being spoon-fed to you by the police chief. You've heard from both defenders and critics of the LAPD, and all agree that Chief Moore must go. He covered up the actions of officers who killed their own Houston Tipping during a training exercise after Tipping filed a report on the rape of a woman by 4 LAPD officers, one of whom took part in the training where he was killed. He failed to act on behalf of an LAPD officer who was being sexually harassed at work. How many others have gone unreported because LAPD refuses to protect their own? He lied on the record to the public about the number of traffic stops made in South Central in 2021, stating the number was 74, when the actual recorded number was 639. That's an underreporting by 762%. He denies that LAPD was responsible for the deaths of Janisha Harris and Jamara Keys in August 2022, when police chased a driver through the red light, causing the fatal crash. Targeting protesters, blaming protesters for George Floyd's murder, creating a culture for cops to mock George Floyd's death for Valentine's Day, not holding officers who participated in the January 6th attack accountable, continuing to perpetuate harm on our most vulnerable neighbors through racialized stops of pedestrians and drivers. We literally have nothing to lose. This commission must reject the reappointment of Chief Moore. We can do better. We must do better.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Hamid Khan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So we've had several callers who are just reading out a laundry list of how it goes to show how, you know, the old saying, the fish rots from the head down. So of course, as a rotten institution where the whole apple cart is rotten, you have the chief who is head of this rotten institution. So, you know, there's this constantly, you know, people talking about the murders that he committed, the shootings that he'd been involved in, how he gamed the system through the drop program and enriched himself, and then came back in a very sneaky way and came back for his job again. And then, you know, his claim to fame about bringing in, building on another rotten apple, I would say, Bill Bratton's legacy of data-driven policing and bringing in technology, which then he comes back in April 2019 after people have been murdered in laser zones and predictive policing program. And all he had to say was, and the gall to say, that it was an experiment. So, you know, which brings me to the whole taser issue as well, that we've got to stop calling them less lethal. I mean, dozens of people die as a result of tasers, Bonner. So, you know, if you have a little bit of sense, let's first of all just kind of completely strike this bullshit out that it's a less lethal tool, because it murders people. Which kind of leads me to this whole issue of electronic surveillance. So the big hoopla about Edward Snowden was that how NSA was snooping into people's phones, tapping into people's information, going into emails. And that's exactly what this is all about. This is about the pen register, which are tools that are set up that document all outgoing calls, that document various other ways that people are communicating with each other. Add that into the social media surveillance, add that into the See Something, Say Something program, add that into the millions of hours of body cam videos that LAPD collects and evidence.com uploads. You have a whole stalker state in motion. You have everything that people are doing, whether in their private lives or public lives, or who they are speaking to, where they are going, following them with the license plate readers. And then on top of that, using stingrays. So what we have here is a massive surveillance apparatus that is basically just Snoop constantly gathering data on us and building cases. There's a whole process that the DEA uses called parallel construction. Bonner look into that sometimes. And that's exactly what the LAPD does. That it just builds these cases constantly. It puts people into their databases and then goes and targets them. So we've got to completely stop doing that. Abolish the police, abolish the LAPD. We got to completely take the money away and defund this goddamn department.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 2258.
Hi.
Hi, what items would you like to
Can you
speak
hear
on?
me?
Yes, what items would you
I'm
like?
just going to do just general comment.
Okay, 1 minute.
Hi, I'm Kelly McIver. I'm a member of White People for Black Lives. My main comment is regarding Chief Moore and his request for reappointment. Commissioners, you already know the list of grievances against him is long, and many of which were already very well brought up before me in today's comments. We need a change in leadership. Chief Moore must not be reappointed. We're looking to you, commissioners, to give Mayor Bass choices beyond this man. No more. I yield the rest of my time for additional voices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Secretary, the next caller will be the last.
Okay, next we have Art Schaefer.
Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
Good afternoon, good morning. Please, there is a FBI put severe radiation source right in my neighbor's home, and it affects my health. I have cancer all over my body, and police does nothing. I'm telling them this is in this apartment, they don't come in. They say, call the FBI. FBI say, call the 911. And I'm football between these two. No one is protecting me. I spoke on December 13 here. No one took any action. I wrote a personal letter yesterday to Mr. Briggs and Mr. Soborow. So far, no response. Tell me, please, are you going to do anything? It's useful to be here. In other words, police is heavily supporting the perpetrators, and there is no protection for us. What are you going to do about it? I know that there are hundreds of people in this city, in the same situation like me. I have nothing more to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. At this time, we're going to go to item 3 on the agenda, the consent agenda items. Are there any commissioners that want any matters held up for discussion?
Yes, please. 3A.
Thank you. I move that we adopt items 3B and C. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3A, Captain Espinosa, can you please come forward?
Good morning.
Good morning, Captain. Commissioner Bonner, you had a question.
Yeah, and one or two probably for the captain, and the last one may be for possibly for the chief. The first question just about digital evidence management, and the question is that is this relating only to evidence of crimes, or does this also relate to potential evidence of misconduct? So is it only external use, or is it have some internal application?
So the goal is evidence retention when it comes to digital in-car video and body-worn video, whether that's civil, criminal, administrative. So all of the above. The reality is each day we're collecting more evidence, and the technological debt, that ceiling will eventually have to be either expanded, or we'll have to look into a deletion policy. And this grant will assist us with discovering that.
Okay, so I understood you to say, when you say all of the above, it means that these are records that are stored and maintained and used for both purposes, or
Correct.
what I'm calling both purposes. Okay, and then this probably is more appropriately directed to the chief. Two questions that that I'll just put out and you can respond to. One is in the public comment, not the verbal comment that we just heard, but in some of the emails that came in, and there was some opposition to this item, and one of the points that was made was a suggestion that that body-worn video has not resulted in any reduction in the use of force. And I know that there's lots of things that body-worn is intended to do, and so there's some questions or thoughts there. But on this particular issue of use of force, I know that it's used obviously to evaluate use of force in some context. But is there or has there been any research since now that it's been several years of number of agencies using the technology? Is there any information that addresses any potential correlation between the prevalence of the body worn video on the one hand and incidents of force?
Yes, and thank you, Commissioner. Earlier work about 6 to 7 years old identified when body worn was first being implemented across agencies in America. It studied the instances of complaints as well as use of force and found reductions. I don't have the quote in front of me. However, I'll ask our folks to research that and provide that information to you.
Is it your understanding, and I appreciate that, is it just high level thinking, is it your impression or understanding that it leans one way or the other, that, you know, that there's been any impact on the incidence of force?
Yes, it leans towards improving the conduct, as has been said on both individuals' parts. The person that is being filmed in the interactions, their conduct, as well as the officer's conduct in regards to not just the use of force, but their the manner in which they engage and interact with members of the public. So when the cameras are up, people have we've seen a reduction in citizen community complaints as well as the instances of officers resorting to force. Again, I don't have the study in front of me. I wasn't prepared to talk about it, but that is the general state of American policing's belief in the system, and also provides the transparency. So we believe that it also improves trust in the community and understanding with the expectation that officers are going to have body worn, so that they can see as members of the public what the officer, or some portion of what the officer saw or experienced.
Okay, appreciate that. And maybe what you can do is have someone send it to the use of force liaisons, and maybe we can then look at it and determine whether it's warrants any further comment here or sharing of the information. The second question is this relating to body worn, and I don't know that it just goes to, the purpose of this is to enhance the capacity to store and manage the evidence. And I'm thinking of, I believe you issued a directive some time ago that delineates, I don't have it chapter and verse, but it delineates the purposes for which supervisors and others can review body worn video. Does that ring a bell with you, Chief?
Well, in regards to, we do review on an inspection basis body worn videos with our gang officers on an ongoing basis. And there are efforts afoot to meeting with the league and a meet and confer viewpoint to expand that randomized inspections that are not tied to an arrest or a critical incident, to get better visibility and understanding of interaction between officers and members of the public when there's not an instance of a complaint of misconduct or a critical incident, such as a use of categorical use of force, a use of force of any type, or an arrest. In those instances, body worn are already reviewed.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll pull it up also what I'm remembering and check with you. I just want to understand again how much, this is suggesting that there's a lot of it being stored and retained. And it's just going to be helpful to make sure, at least for my purposes, I'm clear on how it's also being utilized. What's the value of having all of the data that's being stored. So appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Bonner. Commissioner Sobroff, your mic is open. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't, except a simple Google search will show you numerous studies by numerous research institutes with great gravitas about the results of two things with body-worn cameras. One is the complaints against officers, and two is the use of force. And I believe that the reason is simply as the chief mentioned. When people know they're on camera, they act different, and that has had an impact that has made analyzing use of force situations. It's added a dimension to that. It's also had an impact on trust, where people can see it themselves. The concern is snippets and misinterpreting to meet different groups' own color of the lens of their glasses. But there's a lot of information available, and I'm sure you can pull up stuff that you think is credible by some of the great institutions in America.
Appreciate that, and I will certainly do that. And then also, so Chief, then we can, if there's something else in terms of the thrust of the question, and for example, how that may relate to LAPD, that may be one question that I'll want to pursue with you. But I'll do some of the Google search first, and we can kind of get in conversation about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Soboroff and Commissioner Bonner. At this time, I move that we approve the department's report with regard to body worn camera policy and transmit it to the mayor and the city council. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. At this time, we're going to go to item 4A under the regular agenda items, the department's report on recommendations with respect to electronic surveillance equipment. And we have Director Rhodes, please.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Rhodes. Thank you for joining us today. We've all read the report. Can you speak to those sections of the manual that have been revised? And then if any of the commissioners have questions, we'll go forward and ask those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me share my screen with you and quickly go through the changes to this policy. As I think you're aware, the California legislature wanted to make clear that tracking devices would include devices or software that could be used in tracking the movement of a person or an object. That is in the new policy. And also they placed time limitations on the length of time that tracking warrants could be in use or extended. And that's in the new policy. We also, the last time this policy was updated was 2008. And so there was some cleanup, and I'll go through that a little just because of changes in the department. So starting with just the preamble, you will see that we added what the definition was and also mentioned section in volume 1, 140.15. That, as I think the commission will remember, was the technology policy that this commission discussed and passed in August. The second is to restricted items. And as you can see in italics, this includes what the legislature determined was necessary: devices and software used for the purpose of tracking the movement of a person or object. Additionally, previously, our policy had these in a list in paragraph form, and we put them in a list that goes down so it is easier to read. That's the change. The next change, can you advance it? Sorry, I had a little. The next change comes at the note. With the ubiquitous nature of cell phones that are both cameras and voice recorders, we wanted to make clear that it was both voice or video recorders instead of just the generic recorders. The next change it really is just a change in the way that we refer to divisions. So detective support and vice division was previously just vice division. The next change comes in terms of investigating officers' responsibility and commanding officers' responsibility. Those are both just to make it clear who's responsible for what. And then we go down to the restricted use of these electronic surveillance equipment. As you can see, we've added the department's core values and the exact form that the warrant should be recorded on so that we can keep track of this, all part of the technology, the technology development and reporting system. And then we indicated that as I said before, the legislature asked or mandated that the maximum period of time would be 30 days. And then you would have to go back for good cause to a magistrate to increase the time by 30-day periods. The department believes that it should be a maximum of 60 days unless further good cause is shown and authorized by a magistrate. And then finally, as you can see, frequently we needed to show which exact form any of this electronic surveillance should be recorded on to let people know how they should be recording what they have done in terms of electronic surveillance. So in sum, the big changes were to make sure that we were compliant with the law, and that is to show both that a electronic surveillance device would be any that includes devices or software tracking persons or objects, such as a cell phone, and to put the time limitations on in terms of tracking device warrants.
Thank you, Director Rhodes. I'm going to go to Commissioner Decker. Do you have any questions? Commissioner Sobroff, any questions? Commissioner Kalanche, any questions?
No questions.
Commissioner Bonner, any questions?
Yes, please. And what I'll do is I have 4 questions, and I'll just put them all out, and then either a combination of Director Rhodes and maybe the chief might have a comment. First question just is whether any of the surveillance equipment that's covered here, does it generate any stored audio or video kind of information that's subject to the digital evidence management system we just were discussing? That's one question. Second is there's the section 568.15 that talks about the specified duties of the commanding officer, the staff officers, and the chief of detectives. And the question is, just from a practical and operational standpoint, are these duties directly performed, or do they delegate? So that's the difference of having, say, 4 or 5 people performing these versus potentially a dozen or more if there's some delegation. Third is there any history of misuse of any of the surveillance equipment, and when was the last review of that, and whether it was procedural for compliance, or did it what was it looking at any used for unauthorized purposes? And then finally, who oversees the compliance with that Electronic Communications Privacy Act that's referenced towards the end?
So let me start with that, and I'll go in order. In terms of the first question, and now I'm actually having trouble reading my writing, was about management.
No, the first question was whether anything, since we just talked about that digital evidence management system, is there any audio or visual surveillance information that ever becomes subject to that system we just discussed?
So I think the answer is yes, certainly that is a much broader policy than this, and that is a policy that will require reporting. I know that the reporting is already being worked on with both the executive committee and ITB, and that's going forward. And this will not add to that, because that policy is much more of an umbrella. So this doesn't add to it, but it falls under that umbrella of that much larger and robust policy about reporting back to the commission. That's number one. As to the duties, the specified duties, they are to an officer and a commanding officer. But I think, as with anything, there can be, especially in exigent circumstances or other cases, delegations. I don't think there's a prohibition specifically on that. But it is expected that, the people responsible for what is involved for an officer's duty or commanding officer's duty are to be the person who that refers to. As to a review for abuse, I'm unaware of any specific abuse, but I do believe that this commission's desire and in oversight and in passing the larger technology policy in August is to make sure that it is my belief that one of the things that will do is to make sure there aren't abuses and to make sure that we catch any issue in a very timely manner. And I think that this commission is on top of that. And then in terms of oversight, I think that depends on who is doing the tracking. The tracking has to have, depending on who applied for a tracking warrant, et cetera, would have the oversight as specified in the policy, but also the overarching technology policy from August gives this commission some oversight as to what the department has used technology for.
So on that last one, relative to that one, and probably even the other question about the prior look at compliance, that might be something that we might ask to be included in an audit plan.
Yes, and we can.
How we would have what mechanism we would have, between audit division and the inspector general, but that might be one mechanism if we were inclined to look at it. And I don't know that I'm asking that. I'm just understanding what our role might be that you've mentioned, and it just strikes me that it might be something we might ask to be included in an audit plan.
Yes, I think the chief raised his hand.
No, I just want to add to it, but go ahead and finish your thought, Director Rhodes.
Yes, Commissioner Bonner, and I think if we want to add that to the audit plan, if you would we can talk offline, and with myself and OCPP covers audit division, and we can talk about what the framework might be or how we want to address that.
I appreciate that. And mind you, I'm not making that request. Again, you had mentioned a couple of times that the commission has some visibility and role in the oversight. So I'm just confirming, what that practical, what that might mean practically. So that's the spirit of the question. And Chief, you were going to add something to.
Yeah, yes, and looking at the a review of the manual section on this, as far as the review of the 12.41, which is really the authoring document that goes to the restricted electronic use and how it's actually done. The processing of that assumes or provides for audit inspection authorities, if you will, review by the area commanding officer as well as the bureau commanding officer. And then each of these requests and logging will go to the chief of detectives, where that position forwards to the innovation management division for inclusion in the annual department's comprehensive technology report. So I will say that those processes, of course, will protect the integrity of those underlying investigations, but there is points of review along the way for proper usage, and the completion of the forms is required. And then, of course, as you've discussed with Director Rhodes, the department or the inspector general's individual inspection or audit of the process to ensure adherence to standards is also always available.
Appreciate that. And the first part of what you described that's kind of baked in, is that something that happens automatically, or is that something that anybody has to ask to occur, the auditing that you mentioned?
It's a standing reference. For instance, on page 5 of the document, one of the responsibilities of the bureau commanding officer who's reviewing the use of electronic requests is to notify the chief of police of any concerns or problems that arise from electronic surveillance equipment usage. So each level of review baked into that is a responsibility to watch for, to ensure adherence and to check for errors or areas that need to be further inspected to reinforce these guidelines.
Got it. All right. Appreciate that. Thank you, Director Rhodes, as well. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Any further questions from any of the other commissioners based on Commissioner Bonner's questioning. Seeing none, I move that we approve the department's report. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Rhodes. At this time, at 11:45, we're going to go into closed session, and then we'll return. Thank you, everyone.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss Agenda Item 5A in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Yeah. It appears we have a quorum. Mr. Teefank, can you proceed with the readout of closed session?
Yes, Mr. President. Commission's concluded its work in closed session related to item 5A1, law enforcement related injury number 005-22. The commission adopted the chief of police recommendations on a 4-0 vote. Those recommendations were tactics, tactical debrief, 1 Sergeant 1, and 2 police officer 3s. Non-lethal use of force in policy, 2 police officer 3s. Relates to item 5A2, in custody death, number 006-22. Commission on a 5-0 vote adopted the chief of police recommendations, which were tactics, administrative disapproval, 2 police officer 2s. Inmate intake procedures, not consistent with established criteria, 2 police officer 2s, 1 Sergeant 1, 1 senior detention officer, 1 detention officer. Inmate welfare procedures, consistent with established criteria, 2 senior detention officers, 2 detention officers. Inmate emergency medical procedures, consistent with established criteria, 1 senior detention officer, 1 detention officer, 2 police officer 2s. Post in custody death procedures, consistent with established criteria, 1 captain 3, 1 lieutenant 1, 1 senior detention officer. That concludes the report out.
Thank you, Mr. Teefank. There being no further business before the Board of Police Commissioners, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and stay safe out there.
Thank you.